All right, we're going to be starting in another minute or two. This is Toffee, by the way, and yeah, I have to have Toffee on my lap, or else she's going to be making so much noise that this thing's not going to work. So, special guest Toffee on the event today. We're going to go in. I'll just leave it another minute or so. My Coke and my TEDxRuakura mug.
Very good. Where's my stunt double? Is he around?
No, that's fine. We're going to wait another minute or so. Aubrey can join us a little bit later on. So let me get ready with a couple of things in the background. Cool. All right. Right. Another minute and we'll get started. Ricky, do you want to shut off your video for a bit? Because we're going to talk to Aubrey first anyway, I think, and get you on a little bit later on. All right. And I will turn my text messages off, but that's the producer messaging me because I'm at home, they're at home. So, yeah, maybe I won't turn my notifications off. Yep. All right, so here we go. Let's get this show on the road. As I said before, my name's Chris Hanlon. Welcome to TEDxRuakura Salon. This is the what do you call it? The lockdown edition. Aubrey, I'll get you just to turn your video off just for the moment and mute. And if you can turn your video off there, Aubrey, for a moment, and I'll invite you on in a second. Okay. All right. So, TEDxRuakura Salon, challenge your paradigm. Now, first of all, I want to welcome you to the TEDxRuakura Salon, the lockdown edition. This was originally, of course, intended to be a live event. Due to the COVID-19 crisis, we decided a couple of weeks ago that we wouldn't go ahead with a live event, and we were going to live stream it from one location. So we're going to have us all effectively on a stage, if you like, and I was going to interview my guests as I normally would on stage. But with the recent lockdowns, the decision was made to all of us are going to obviously be in isolation. So this is going to be on a web basis. So you guys will appreciate that, no doubt. Before I start off, I'm going to go through a few things that I do every TED and TEDx event. So the first thing, what is TED? So if my feeling is you probably know what TED is or you wouldn't be here. But TED is a voluntary organization. It's a non-profit, and they get some of the best thinkers in the world to condense down their subject matter that they're an expert on and give a talk for 15 to 20 minutes typically. There are some short ones, 2-minute little talks and that sort of thing as well, but typically it's 15 to 20 minutes. So it's a good bite-sized piece of information that has some detail but is available, if you like, or accessible to the layman. And it gets your interest up and allows you to find out more. And so now you know what TED is. What is the X on the end? What is this TEDx thing? So a few years ago now, TED decided that there was so much community demand that they allowed local events to be held. So this is an independent local event, independently run local event. And so they give a license out. Part of that license is that it's purely voluntary, non-profit. So none of the speakers gets paid, and none of the volunteers, none of the organisers, myself, I'm doing the hosting for the salons. I do the coaching for the main events. I've even seen a couple of events. Nobody gets paid for any of that. We do it because we love it, and we want to get people on a platform that they wouldn't normally get onto. So the next question I'm usually asked is, why is this TEDxRuakura? Why isn't it TEDx Hamilton? Because we're based in Hamilton, New Zealand. The short answer is that Hamilton was already taken. TEDx Hamilton was already taken by some Canadians in Hamilton. So we had to go with a name locally in New Zealand. The obvious one was TEDx Waikato. However, you can't name it under a region. This is the rules of TED. You can't name your local event under a region, because if somebody within that region tried to start one, they'd sort of be under you. It doesn't work. So you can be a street, a suburb, or a city. Well, we didn't really want to go with TEDx Kirirawa, which is the Māori name for Hamilton. Mainly because the URL is just an awkward one to spell, I think, if you didn't know it. So we went with TEDxRuakura. Ruakura is a suburb within Hamilton. It's where Innovation Park is, ag research, the university. So it just fits with the technology side of Hamilton. So that's why we're called TEDxRuakura. Now, the next question is, what is a salon? Now, what we do at TEDxRuakura is every year we have a major event. We have 10 to 12 speakers usually, and they each speak for around 15 to 20 minutes on a subject. And we work with those. I'm a speaker coach, so we work with those guys for 3 to 6 months to get them ready for that 15-minute talk. There's a lot of work goes into those talks. What we also do in these salons, and that's a separate license that we have, and we run 3 or 4 salons a year. And that's more about building our community. So these salons are generally in a live environment. We might be in this one was scheduled to be at the University of Waikato. And the reason for that is we like to get like-minded people together, and we interact and all the rest of it. Obviously, that aspect of this is going to be a little changed with the lockdown situation. But I'm going to encourage you to jump on the chat on the live stream and ask questions and that sort of thing, and join us on Facebook. And in the Facebook group, the Facebook page, I should say, just search TEDxRuakura. There's a TEDxRuakura page, and we'll have some chats going on there. Introduce yourself, that sort of thing. Okay, so that's what the salons are. Our main event for this year is scheduled for the 20th of September this year. Our seating is somewhere between 300 and 350. I think it's 320, something like that. So if things go well with the coronavirus, and we can have groups of up to 500 again, that may go ahead. Obviously, this is in the future. We don't know what's going to happen. That may not go ahead. So we'll take that as it comes. But put it in your diary anyway. The 20th of September is our live event. Salons are a bit different, though. So it's not fair to say we'll take these speakers and work with them for 3 to 6 months to hone their talk to be amazing, and then say, oh, we've got a salon in 6 weeks' time. Do you want to speak? Because that's way too much pressure to put on anyone. So the way we do our salons, TEDxRuakura, is they're hosted as an interview style. So it's usually me interviewing them on stage, and we'll get somebody, and this is the point. If anything goes wrong, it's my fault. It's not my guest's fault. It's my fault for not doing things well, right? Not preparing, not guiding the conversation. So if anything goes wrong, blame me. Don't blame our guests. And we have two great guests for you today. And the theme for today is challenging your paradigm. Now, this topic came up before COVID-19 became real for most of us in New Zealand. I mean, it was real for other people, particularly in China at that time. But for us here, it was something far away. With the amount that's changed in the last 2 weeks, I think it's fair to say all of us are having our paradigms challenged right now. So this, in a way, is quite fitting. But it obviously wasn't planned as such. I can't take credit for that. Now, I do want to give a bit of clarity here. Paradigm, I need to explain what a paradigm is. Paradigm is a framework of assumptions or understandings of how you believe the world to be. And it's often invisible to us. Our own assumptions are something we have, but we don't think about. They're just assumptions. They're just there. And often you'll hear the expression of a paradigm shift. That's where you have the set of assumptions and they suddenly challenge and then they go somewhere else. And I think a great example of a paradigm shift is one by the late Stephen Covey. He had a great example. And I'm going to tell you the story that he told that gives you an idea of what a paradigm shift is. Now, this would be awkward to tell in the third person, so I'm going to tell it first person as if it happened to me. It didn't happen to me, but I'm going to tell you the story this way. So I'm sort of standing on a commuter train, and everybody's there. We're going to work, and some people reading or playing with their phones or anything. It was quite quiet. And this man comes on with 3 kids, and he sits down, and he's just looking down, and he's just ignoring the kids. And these kids are going nuts. They're running up and down, they're playing tag, they're screaming, they're yelling, and I'm getting a little annoyed, and I look at some of the other passengers and they're getting a little annoyed, and it's just getting more and more frustrating. And he's doing nothing. He's just sitting there. And I'm getting really annoyed. And so I say to him, your kids, they're sort of running riot in this car. And the guy looks at me and he's sort of a bit unfocused, and then he looks at me and goes, "Oh, yeah, sorry. We've just come from the hospital and their mother just passed away, and I guess I don't know how to deal with it. I'm sure they don't know how to deal with it either." In that moment, that paradigm shift happens. And I have gone from this guy's annoying me to, oh my God, what can I do to help? That's terrible. I totally understand where these kids are going from now. I understand why he's disassociated from what's happening. I understand that because my assumptions have been challenged and I'm in a different place. So that's a paradigm shift. And it's a very, I think, a powerful example of what a paradigm shift is. So that's what we're going to talk about, that specifically. And the 2 guests I have tonight to challenge your paradigm on a couple of things you may have never thought about, which is the whole point of paradigms. So the first up is Aubrey Tikanua. Now, Aubrey has been working on an area that's concerned for some time, and that's around the affordability and availability of housing in the region and across New Zealand. So, Aubrey, you can turn your camera on now, unmute yourself, and say hello.
Oh, kia ora, Chris. Thanks for the invite onto this salon session, and just acknowledge the work you're doing to pull this together, given everything that's happening. It gives us some semblance of normality and continuity in some pretty hairy times.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. You're in your lounge, I guess, there. I'm I'm in a room at home. I just happen to have a green screen and stuff because I do a lot of this stuff. So it looks good, but it's not that great. Okay, so and I should mention if I get annoyed by the cat, it's just on my lap, and that's what's going on there. She'll be quiet most of the time, I think. Okay, so housing and affordability. Let's start with, can you lay that problem out? Because a lot of people, again, we're challenging paradigms here. So a lot of people, it's not a thing on their radar. A lot of people it is, obviously. But for those of us that aren't as aware, do you want to tell us what that means, this whole affordability and availability of housing?
Sure. There's three components to, the housing issue. One is affordability. That's just the price of houses. One is quality, the standard of houses in New Zealand. And the third one is available, and that's just about supply and demand. So the affordability piece, it's kind of hard to explain, but there's multiple factors that go into causing a housing affordability issue. Part of it's got to do with how the market, the construction market works, how affordable it is to actually put together a house. Part of it's about the supply, part of it's about the demand. There's a whole bunch of factors involved. And when you have all three of those issues in a region, it can lead to some pretty serious issues. Because if you think about every person that might not be well housed, that's one family or family unit that's now not productive in society as much as they could be, because they're worried about other things, because there's illnesses that are related to the quality and the standard of the housing, a lot of worry and social anxiety from not being able to have a basic human need fulfilled, which is a roof over your head.
Yeah. How widespread do you think that problem is in New Zealand?
Well, the government has more accurate statistics. The last time I checked, it was pretty bad. They acknowledged that there's a shortage of houses, but again, there's a lot of factors that go into it, because there's housing supply, and yes, you could build exactly the number of houses required to fill the shortfall, but it's only a temporary solution, because market dynamics will push those houses into parts of the market, and the parts of the market that need the houses will then, it'll pop up again. So there's more of a structural issue in terms of how the housing market works in New Zealand.
So trying to remedy like that is sort of a moving target, is what you're saying. So every time you throw some stock in that area, it sort of pops up as a problem somewhere else.
That's right. And the best way to sort of think about it is that if you can imagine a staircase sort of from the bottom rung being transitional emergency housing, and just for someone needs a house that immediate day or week, then you step up a level, you've got sort of social housing, which is supplied by the government. Then you step up another level, then you've got rental housing, step up another level, and you've got home ownership, and then you step up another level into landlordship. Now, if you think about that whole spectrum, there's a hole in the market around the rentals, and also the public housing supply. That's where there's an issue. And what's happened is where
the lack of supply is that what you're saying?
There's a big lack of supply, in particular in that area. And what's happened is over time, as the stock in home ownership has been soaking up all of the stock for rentals. And then you have the whole Airbnb comes along and then soaks up all of the free stock, where people can earn more, putting their houses up for tourists than making it available for people in rentals. There's probably, if you took out Airbnb, there might be enough supply to actually solve some of the housing crisis at the moment.
I've never really thought of that. How big a factor is that Airbnb? Is that quite widespread, is it?
Well, I'll give you an example. So in my hometown in Raglan, when I was first getting into the housing issue, I looked online and found that there was about 160 odd homes on holidayhomes.com or whatever it was. And then I looked how many were in Waikato, and there was and then I had a look how many were in Waikato, in Raglan, and basically most of the stock was in Raglan in terms of holiday homes available for rent. Then I looked at the shortfall in Raglan, and most of the housing stock that was available was being soaked up for holiday rentals. So that's where my journey started, was in Raglan, in a township that is a tourism town, where most of the stock is being soaked up.
So having seen that problem, what do you then do? What was your action there? Where did you go with that?
That led me on a 10-year journey to build a papakainga, which is the equivalent, if you were in Israel, it would be called a kibbutz. And probably the best equivalent I can explain it is a retirement village. But it's community housing. It's a village of houses. It's owned by a collective. In this case, it was our land block. And by building those houses, we could try and start alleviating the housing supply issues in Raglan.
Right.
More importantly, our land block was motivated to put our own people back on that land to try and to solve another issue, which is around disconnection of people from their lands and from their culture.
Yeah. Okay. So now, did I hear that right? It was older people that you were looking at first? No,
it was more about, we actually did some survey to work out who was in need the most, and it wasn't necessarily elderly alone, because in our cultural dynamic, for Māori people, we don't put kaumātua and elderly out on their own. They still need young people around them to help support them. Equally, there's a nice dynamic where you have elderly and kaumātua who actually in the prime of their lives to contribute to the children. So when you put it together a community, you're trying to think about all of the parts of the puzzle, not just the elderly alone.
Cool. It was when you said it was like a retirement village. That's what.
Yeah, closest comparison in terms of.
Yeah. No, I got you. That's my fault. Okay, cool. So now when we talked about this really briefly a couple of weeks ago, you said there was a part of the bigger picture there that that struck a chord with me, and one of the reasons that I asked you on this, and it was around the cost to society of this home ownership mentality. I shared with you that when I was quite young, I spent, it's 22, I think. I lived in Spain for a couple of years. And effectively, everybody rented. Nobody owned a house, which was quite different. And I was quite impressionable at that age. So I was like, yeah, well, that makes sense. And I think, and you said that there's a number of European countries that have that sort of mentality. So what is the impact of that against like how we are here?
Yeah, into the paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So in
exactly.
in European countries, in a number of European countries, it is not the norm. It's not the normal paradigm that you own your own house. So if you were in Germany, for example, if you move into a flat there, you take the kitchen sink with you, and you fit out the whole house as if you owned it, but you don't own it. There's major housing conglomerates over there whose speciality is looking after rental properties and having big portfolios. So they're geared specifically for that, and so is their legislation, and so is their culture. So there's a number of components that go together.
That would give a whole bunch of, I guess, economy of scale in terms of land ownership and in terms of building and building bigger complexes, but more thoughtfully, rather than some landlord builds one house here and somebody builds something quite different here, and somebody builds, so you've got a $1 million one and a $500,000 one and a whatever, is that what you're sort of saying?
Yeah, there's efficiencies in the way that they deal with housing over there. It's treated as national infrastructure, which when you think about it, that kind of makes sense. If everyone has a house over their head, they're then able to be productive. One of the other benefits too is that when all your capital's not soaked up in a mortgage, you're then able to release that capital for other purposes, i.e. starting a business. So again, there's a cultural difference here, whereas in New Zealand, we're told, finish school, go get education, get a job, buy a house. And I think the principle is, when you strip it back, the principle is is it better to own your own house or be well housed? So if you ask that philosophical question, you'll arrive at different answers. Now, I think in New Zealand, we've had the luxury of having lots and lots of land available to be able to continue the 800 square meter Kiwi dream. But that time's coming to an end, and a paradigm shift in housing is now required to solve the housing issue. And that means legislation, cultural change, finance change, and how the market works. All of that has to change. So Papakainga for me was part of that, as part of that whole paradigm shift.
Yeah. So how do you think? Walk us through that change. How do you think we could navigate that change? Because you can't. A paradigm shift, as I explained in the intro, can be in a snap. Thing like, oh, I think things differently, but you're not necessarily going to do things differently. And particularly with laws the way they are, and society or culture pushing you one way, peer pressure, if you want to call it that, or whatever, but it's more a societal thing than just pure peer pressure. You're sort of on a trajectory, and it's hard to bend that trajectory to something different. So how do you think we could navigate that, or what could we do as a society to move that frame?
I actually think we're starting to hit it now, because you're right. It's hard to change the trajectory of the Titanic until it hit the iceberg. And so when you hit a housing crisis and there's a whole bunch of issues, people are scrambling for answers. And it's at those moments where innovation has an opportunity to pop up. And I think you need a certain degree of crisis.
And then this COVID thing is a perfect example, because, and we'll talk about this later, but I can't help myself but mention it now, because there are so many people that are at home and they're finding tools like Zoom that we're using right now, and they're realizing, oh, there are different things I could be doing, and I wonder, because you can't put that genie back in the bottle. We're going to be in lockdown, I'm assuming, for at least 8 weeks. I know it's 4 weeks officially, but I think it's going to be at least 8 weeks. And I think it's going to revolve, and we're going to be on lockdown and off and on and off, different regions and things. And so people are going to realize that there's all these other things happening or available to them. And that's going to change us fundamentally as a society. So what innovations in the housing area are coming on stream, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about your program that you were working with. So what are they? And it might be other innovations as well. And how will they help us, and where do they fit in?
In terms of my previous work with Te Puni Kōkiri and working in the Papakainga housing space, we actually visited a lot of different areas to talk to them about the advantages of having Papakainga rules to allow for these types of multi-dwelling developments on single title land. And every single council we went to was receptive to the idea, but they could see the issues they would have navigating the paradigm change that they would have to then put into place. So that was part of the work, is around getting them to understand what could they do legislatively in terms of their 10-year plans that would allow Māori with Māori whānau with Māori land, which is different legislatively and very difficult to develop. But could they utilise their lands to be part of the solution to the housing crisis? Because a lot of it's affecting Māori and Pacific Island people. So that was part of it. And the other part is being involved in projects around the country. So I was involved in a transitional housing facility up in Whangarei, which recently opened. Another one down in
So what's the transitional housing? Where does that fit in? What's the circumstances somebody would find themselves in to have
So if someone was in need of housing, they for whatever reason they were not in a space to have housing over their head, through MSD and through the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, they could get access to transitional housing. Now, in a lot of cases, you would have probably heard about this in the public, motels being soaked up to fill that void because the facilities just weren't available. But a good transitional housing facility is, it's got beds and houses, but it also has access to wraparound services to help a whānau transition from wherever they are to a place where they're in stable housing. So that's what a true transitional housing facility is about. It's about trying to facilitate people through their temporary situation into a more permanent situation.
And how long would that transition generally take? And I know that there'd be quite a wide variance in that, but
yeah, legislatively 90 days. But if anyone who works in the social sector will know that it takes a lot longer to transition a whānau in dire needs through to being stable again, because there's so many reasons why they might be in that place, and you have to deconstruct it and try and help the whānau come to a place where, first get through the immediate issues and then build up their whānau to a point where they can go into some better housing.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, that's where legislative change is important. 90 days is not enough, certainly not enough.
So what sort of legislative change are we talking here?
Well, in the case of transitional housing, 90 days is not enough. So it has to be, in my view, it needs to be much longer to allow those social services to really get their work done. So that's one minor piece of legislative change. In terms of legislative change for housing, like one of the changes is to the Residential Tenancy Act. So that act, which regulates all the rentals in New Zealand, I think we need to be moving more towards a German model, which allows for longer tenancies. And those changes will make it easier for renters to know that they're in stable tenure.
So it incentivizes a longer tenancy? Is that how that works? Yeah. Yeah,
incentivizes a longer tenancy, but it also places more responsibility on those tenants in terms of the internals of the house. So it's not the landlord doing the internal fit out; it's the tenant, because the tenant has much longer.
A little bit more like a commercial rental, where you're renting the shell, but you're responsible for the internals. Oh, okay, okay, yeah, okay, that sounds interesting. And again, that's a paradigm shift for me, because
that's right. It's so weird to people, but that's what's kind of required. The other thing too is the market. We've got a monopoly. I'm going to be quite blunt about it. We've got a monopoly on building supplies in New Zealand. So there are building materials out there in the world that we don't have access to, which if we did have access to, the cost of building would probably be half the price.
Sorry, so what do you, how do you mean? Give me an example.
So if you build a house, part of it's labor, part of it's materials. If you think about where you get your materials from to build a house in New Zealand, you think about where those products come from, and you'll find it's very monopolistic in New Zealand.
I've never built a house, obviously. So what you mean? All the wood's coming basically from one supply type thing.
If you look at all of the materials, there's materials out there in the world that we could be using. There's products out there in the world, but there are. By the time you land in New Zealand, get it through all of the testing and whatnot, you'll find that price of that same item has now gone up, however many fold. And if you were to build the same house in say America or Europe, you'd find it's a completely different price. I think if you look at regulations, there's no, if we took our regulations from say Japan in terms of building materials, which has an equally high earthquake situation, we could apply those same building standards here without having to change it, but then that gives us access to all of the materials that they would get. Anyway, I'm getting into the nitty-gritty a little bit, but there's definitely some market dynamics that need to change.
Okay, all right, so all right, well, let's so if there's anything that you would suggest to our community, people listening, watching today, what would it be? And it might be something more substantial. It might be something just a mindset type thing. What would you suggest that they think about or do to help move us along this path?
I think for the average person, I'm not sure what you could do to change the paradigm. I think a lot of the paradigm shifts need to happen within government, within local councils, within the building industry. That's where most of the paradigm shift has to happen, because with the housing market, there's a lot of regulation involved. It's not the type of market where you could come up with some quick innovation and implement it. There's still a lot of red tape. And so without that being dealt with, you can't really create the type of paradigm shift that you need. I think a lot of it does lie in the hands of the ministers in terms of putting together the right policy. But there is a cultural shift that we can do as citizens to say to government and to local councils, hey, let's try this. And you get that opportunity every time they're reviewing their district plans.
Right.
And so, yeah, lobbying your local councils and your minister.
Excellent. Good stuff. Well, any final parting words? So just before you do, while you're thinking that, for everybody out there, we're going to go to our second guest rather in a second. And but if you have any questions for Aubrey, chuck them in the chat on the live stream. So if you're watching this on the website, I think you can click on the video. It'll open up in YouTube and there'll be the chat on the right hand side. Just pop your questions in there. We're going through those questions with everybody at the end. Okay, so if you want to do that. So what do you want to finish with there, Aubrey? Anything you want to say?
No, just thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, again, congratulations for trying to do something cool.
Yeah, well, you got to, if we talk about innovation all the time with all these innovative people, and then the crap hits the fan, who are we if we don't try and innovate our way out of it? So yeah, but thanks for putting up with us. And again, this is sort of all new for me. I haven't live streamed a web meeting before, and I certainly haven't interviewed anyone in this environment before, so that's all new to me. So thanks for putting up with this. But I'll get you to mute yourself and put yourself on, close your camera down. And thank you. Right, so for everybody, that was our first guest. You've got a taste of where this is going. This is all about challenging your paradigms. So our next speaker is Ricky Manarangi. Ricky's a long-time member of the community and a supporter of TEDxRuakura. I don't know how many years ago I first met him at one of our events, and seen him many times since. So what we're going to be talking about today with Ricky is the gig economy. And that I thought we'd leave that to second because it's so relevant to what we're experiencing here with the COVID-19 lockdown. So Ricky, do you want to pop on camera there and say hello?
Kia ora, good evening. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for the opportunity, mate. Endorse a lot of what Aubrey's already said. It's pretty fantastic that you were able to pull this one out of your hat or the bag or whatever the phrase.
Out of the hat, yeah.
Out of the hat, yeah.
I've got the hat on because I've got spiky hair at the moment and it looks really weird with the green screen behind it. So I was like, I better put a hat on. Okay, so we're going to talk about the gig economy, you and I, specifically. And again, I'm just talking to the viewers for a second here. If you have any questions for Aubrey, click on the video on the website. It'll open up YouTube. On the right-hand side, there's chat. Put your questions down there. Equally, if you have questions for Ricky, do the same. And then when we're finished with Ricky, we'll bring Aubrey back on. We'll have the three of us here and we'll answer any questions you have. Okay, so having said that, Ricky, how do you define the gig economy? What is it? Tell the viewers what the gig economy is.
In simple terms, it's all in the name, actually. What you think of, hey, look, I've just got a gig. If you're a musician, it's the same concept. So I've just got a task, I think is probably another word that you could use to replace the word gig if you wanted to try and make sense of that. And then put economy next to it. It just means that it's a different characterization of the supply of labor, and that you are actually going out and doing a task or performing a job.
So what's the difference between that and having a job?
Well, a gig economy person, I suppose, for want of a better phrase, is somebody that is essentially a short-term contract worker. So a lot of us have probably been in the position where we've either worked as a contractor, or we have worked or had contractors work alongside us. And a lot of us have been in the position where we've been employers, and we all have a little bit of an idea of the difference between them. While the gig economy person is a lot shorter in that time frame, so it's really project or task orientated.
Yeah, so I guess the most common contractor most of us might have had an experience with is like the plumber. The pipe's busted, I'm going to hire a plumber. You're not hiring them for a week, hopefully. You're not hiring them for, a long-term thing. You're hiring them to get that pipe fixed. That might take an hour, might take 2 hours, might take a week. But you're only hiring them for that one job. And so what I'm hearing you say is in the gig economy, it's more like a micro job where that might be 1 hour, might be almost 5 minutes. I mean, depending on what it is, but it could be very short. It could be a little bit longer. Am I getting that right?
You've nailed it. You've got it. You've nailed it completely on the head. And so it's a concept which is quite new to Kiwis in terms of it having more of an online presence. But overseas, it has been around a lot longer, particularly in the United States. They've been a little bit more comfortable with using online for the purposes of leveraging the power of on-demand workers, I suppose you could say, or on-demand people.
Now, I think, and you can challenge me absolutely on this, but I think the reason that it's a lot more caught on, if you like, in the States is more the employment labor side of the equation, because over there, I don't think they have the same labor protection that we do here. If you've got a job, as I understand it, and I might be wrong, in the States, you can go, I don't like the color of your tie, you're fired out of here. There's no restriction on that. So in a sense, they're always on tenterhooks all the time. They're always, a lot of employees are like, I could lose my job tomorrow. So going from that to an Uber driver, which is probably the most common gig economy that most of us would know, like driving an Uber, that isn't so far a distance for them to jump. Whereas in New Zealand, going from I earn a stable income, which I know they can't fire me without a couple of weeks, a month's notice, and they have to go through all this stuff, which is really probably like 2 to 3 months notice. So I've got that security net, to jumping into random people paying me online for me doing a job, and if I don't do the job, they don't pay me, and if I don't find any jobs, I'm not getting paid anything. It's quite a leap.
I think that's probably fair to some extent, but my understanding is throughout different parts of the States, there's different requirements in terms of employees. And at the moment, what you used Uber as an example. At the moment, a lot of the rideshare companies in California are currently facing the challenge of whether the drivers are actually gig drivers, i.e. independent contractors, or if they're actually employees. So that's a really big conversation which is going on in the States at the moment. And obviously, the companies like Uber and Lyft are not excited about that conversation.
Yeah, and I guess this is, going back to our theme of challenging paradigms, that the issue with challenging paradigms, and this is true of what we went through with Aubrey earlier as well, is that part of the reason we have the paradigms we have is that legislative background that is forcing us in one trajectory. And so when this innovation comes along, be it housing or be it a gig economy, it sort of butts up against this legislation. It goes, yeah, but we want to go in that direction. The legislation's like, well, no, you have to go that way. So one of the things is going to be for anything that changes is to have that framework or legislative framework to change along with the mental framework that's already changing.
Yeah, and it's with the C word, which is going on currently at the moment, that's going to see quite a different paradigm change in itself when we come out the other side. And my thinking around that is going to be, there's going to be a lot more comfort in terms of using technology. So from a gig economy perspective, there are lots of online shared platforms at the moment overseas where you could get somebody to do basically all of your graphics design, and you wouldn't even know what they look like. So you pay for it with credit card. Those sort of companies at the moment are really benefiting quite large, but there are some that are in between, which are like Uber. So they do have an online presence, but at the same time, someone physically needs to pick someone up and take them somewhere. And at the moment, with the lockdown that we have currently, we're seeing that having a significant impact on the likes of Uber. So other digital platforms like Zoom are able to show a lot more value at the moment. So if you're purely online, you're benefiting at the moment. If you're in between, not quite.
Zoom is doing really, really well. And I have to admit, I'm quite comfortable in the gig economy thing. What I say quite. It's probably 10 years ago, I got my first app built, which was a simple GST calculator, because I was really annoyed with the ones that are out there. And I just wanted to see how I could get it done. So I got it created by somebody in India and was just given away for free. It wasn't like making money out of it. And then, so it was 10 years ago. I've been on Fiverr and both sides of the equation. I've had items. Cat wants to move now. I've had items that I have bought, but I've also done scripts for videos and copywriting and stuff like that. So I've done that sort of thing on Fiverr in the past, and various other little Fiverr gigs to see what it was like. So I think you're right. People who so $600,000 people in one day signed up for Zoom after this lockdown. This is internationally. That's a hell of a lot of people that are using a tool that I've used, frankly, for 4 years, I think, 3 years now, because we coach our speakers on Zoom. And, that's going to create some shifts in paradigms to a lot of people. So you're right. They're going to realize that, hey, there is a possibility that I can stay home with my kids if that's what they want to do and make an income.
No, you're right. I mean, those are completely fair comments. I mean, at the moment, it's pretty tricky to tell what's going on, but I think what is quite clear, people are starting to question the real need around bricks and mortar in terms of being able to do a lot of things that they need to do. So what we thought was essential, people are able to review that and say, actually, I don't think those having that infrastructure is as essential as we thought it was in terms of performing what we've always been doing.
I wrote a piece in Medium a week ago, maybe, and I made the point. I'm going to share the story now briefly, but I used to work for Telecom, and I'd said it quite a few times when I was in the training team. We should be using webinars. We should be, because at the moment, at that time, we were creating a training, and then we were getting on conference calls and train the trainer. So we had a trainer down in Christchurch, trainer in Wellington, trainer in Hamilton, trainer in Auckland. And then those trainers would train each team. And I said, it'd be easier if we didn't train the trainer. I just did it on webinar for the whole country, or e-learning, record it, and they can watch it when they have a chance to watch it, right? And that was pushed back on a little bit at the time. And then they also had a thing called Agent at Home. So it was a call center. And Southwest Airlines in the States, I think, had been doing it for quite a while now. And at that time, they'd been doing it for a while. And where the agents were at home. And so the call pops into their house. They sit at their desk and they start taking calls from one time to another time. And the calls are routed to their house. So they're working from home. And it saves the business a lot of money, because there's no, like you said, brick and mortar. It's no office. They don't have to supply all that sort of thing. So we had that in the pipeline. And then the Christchurch earthquake happened. And the Christchurch call centre was very specialised. It did one thing. It did newer moves, which is quite technical. And that was wiped out. And actually what we had to do is get that experience, those people that have just suffered an earthquake, whose houses are falling apart, whose families are still there. We flew them up to Hamilton, and they were working here like the next day, which was, full credit to them, because that was a hard call. And that agent at home program that had been languishing for 2 years was up and running within 6 months, and it's going strong today. And that's that paradigm shift through, as you were saying, a crisis, changing it. So yeah, I think you're right. Anyway, sorry, I'm taking over. So how does this shift to a gig economy impact us as a society in terms of lifestyle and economy, and maybe what we expect out of work and those two sides of things?
Well, my personal view on this is consistent with some of the thinking from, if you've heard Singularity University, extremely ahead of the game in terms of their thinking. And some of the thinking is that we will all be our own entity. So we will all be essentially LLCs, limited liability companies in our own right, and that we will have our own brand, and that we will be contracted to organizations. So organizations still won't go away. You still need an organization to organize things. It's all in the word. But I think in terms of how we engage with organizations, we will start to see businesses wanting to be a little bit more efficient and not having to house people in that bricks and mortar, so that people have people on demand. So if I need that plumber, I don't need somebody to sit around and wait for a pipe to burst. I only need that person on an as-needed basis. So I think we are going to see a lot more efficiencies coming out the other side of this.
So from a personal point of view, that would mean that instead of me working, as I said before, I work for telecom, it would be, this is the job I do, I'm a trainer. So I do work for telecom, I do work for the dairy board, I do work for the Hamilton City Council, so instead of having one employer, I have multiple employers because I'm doing what I do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've thought about this concept in terms of my past life as well, is that the learnings that I had from a previous organization in local government, I could then take those learnings to other different local government organizations and impart those learnings around that specific project. So if it was a particular policy, so I could be essentially an expert in that particular policy, and somebody else could be an expert in other policies, and therefore you get a really good product in all these different organizations. So I think there is a lot of benefit beyond the fact that it gives you flexibility to spend more time with family, and there's a few other common sense benefits as well. But I can see us, in terms of your paradigm change, I can see us becoming a lot more accepting of technology, and technology is going to lead us to be a little bit more independent in that space.
Cool. Good. Well, so one of the reasons I wanted to have you talk about the gig economy is the Lonely Seat. So tell me about Lonely Seat, what it is, where you're at, and where you want to be going with that.
Oh, cool. I appreciate the opportunity, Chris. So Lonely Seat is a peer-to-peer delivery platform, which essentially is an online platform connecting someone that wants to get something sent with somebody that's heading in that direction. The thing I say is that with 2 out of 3 vehicles on the road in New Zealand are sole occupancy, so there's only one person in them, which means that there's a hell of a lot of capacity in those vehicles traveling everywhere. And at the same time, somebody's looking for a bit of space to bring their dining room chair or something that they've bought on Trade Me that they want to repurpose to keep the cost down to make it a worthwhile purchase. So what we do is we have a community where we bring those people together, and we're in our early days. End of last year was the launch, and then now we're into the C word at the moment. So it's kind of hunkering down. But
COVID-19, yeah.
COVID-19, yeah, you're right. And I think it could be a blessing in disguise, because if it was a bit earlier last year, I might have brought people on board as things ramped up, and then this might have happened. That might have made things a little bit tricky. So I think at the moment I'm in a good position compared to a lot of other people, just to weather this out a bit more than others can. Yeah. I don't have the staff that I need to continue to keep wondering whether the government subsidies apply to or not.
Yeah. So just to recap on that, so Lonely Seat is there's an excess, well, selling that available space in vehicles already travelling from point A to point B. So you could say, hey, I'm going up to Auckland on Wednesday. I've got a seat or two, and the cat's climbing across the desk now. And I'll rescue her before she jumps on the keyboard and ruins everything. Okay, so going from A to B, I've got 3 seats empty. Does anybody have anything you want me to take from A to B? And then somebody else might be on there and they'll say, I've got typically, I mean, in my mind anyway, the ideal thing for this is, like you said, like a chair, something that's not really heavy, but it's awkward as anything. It'd cost a fortune to courier, but you could easily sling it in the back seat of the car and away you go.
No, you've hit the nail on the head. It's probably going to be the more awkward items. If it was somebody's cell phone, you might use a different service. It's not the bread and butter. But if you bought a nice dining room table or something like that, and it would fit in the back of somebody's van comfortably, and there was reassurance around protection of it, then that van coming back from Christchurch could bring it back quite affordably compared to having it professionally wrapped and then dropped off to a depot, where it might be cost prohibitive. It costs more than the table itself.
Yeah, cool. Okay, and I think that speaks a lot to just that whole thing of there is that empty space. How can we utilize it? And because, you know, back in the day, that was the big question for airlines, particularly because they have flat costs. They're still going to take the fuel from here to here to go there to there. And if they got only 3/4 full, they're losing out on all this seats. And that's where they got the grab a seat and things like that started happening. So this is almost that, but for your everyday domestic traveller.
Yeah, and the beauty of that is we get that community going. And after we all leave our houses in a few months' time, I think there will be an appetite to socially interact a little bit more, and this provides a mechanism anyway to interact. At the moment, the services which are out there are a little bit more impersonal. Nobody remembers the name of the last person that dropped their items off. But if you have the provision to know somebody and review them and use them more often because they travel a particular route between Auckland and Hamilton, then you build up that community. No different to when you stay at somebody's house on Airbnb.
Yeah. I think that's going to be interesting how that goes forward. So for you, I think I just want to drill down for a second on community, because you said that. Now, I remember when we had, I think it was 8 auction sites, online auction sites in New Zealand. I joined all of them. Auction sites were fairly new. I was buying stuff from eBay in the States. And I didn't think Trade Me would last. I thought, these guys won't last, because they came in a little later. I was with these other auction sites beforehand. And obviously I was wrong. I met up with Sam Morgan at one point and admitted to him I bet against him. And he's just grinned because obviously he won that bet. Selling it for 600 million or wherever it was. But the key to that was that community, I think, or they got that right in terms of how you can have that trust factor. And a lot of that stuff they did get from eBay, to be fair, I think. But they really did do that right. So how are you getting your community aspect together on Lonely Seat?
Yeah, I mean, so it's quite a higher threshold in terms of joining as a driver. You have to have a New Zealand driver's license. You have to acknowledge that you haven't done X, Y, and Z. But beyond the sort of finer detail, once they come out the other side, there's expectations on them, no different to if you're part of the Trade Me community. If you've said that you've had this item on Trade Me and it looked like this, and when it arrived it looked quite different, then you've got provision to go back and say, hey, I think I've have been a little bit done over here. So there's the same mechanisms in this, and the purpose of that is to create a good community, as you suggest, and it gives us the opportunity to go back and say, actually, here's why we think that you need to reflect on some of your actions, because we want a really good community for this to work. And why I believe Sam Morgan did a very good job is because there was an understanding of the Kiwi culture. And I don't think that eBay was here, as you would know, at the same time that Trade Me was here. And they just could not break the market. As much as they had deeper pockets than the likes of Sam Morgan, I don't think they understood our culture. Whereas
they didn't understand it, and they didn't want to put the money in here. I think you know, they didn't see it as a big enough market for them. But yeah, you're right. They did start a little bit later. Trade Me was already around, and I thought when they came in they'd roll over Trade Me, and I was wrong. But yeah. Okay, what we're going to do now, and those are good points. But because I think we're getting into the place where we've got some questions. I've got some questions there, sort of distracting me a little bit, to be honest. So what I think we'll do is we'll wrap this up, and we'll get Aubrey to jump back in. And so, Aubrey, if you want to turn your camera back on and unmute yourself, and we'll see if we've got some questions here. So give me a second while I read.
I'm happy to have a punt at some of those. As a Kiwi, I'm happy to have a punt at some of those property questions as well.
Well, I haven't got a lot of property questions at the moment, I don't think. But what I will ask is, so Aubrey, you just listened to Ricky now. What are your thoughts on the gig economy?
Yeah.
Crossover thing.
Yeah. There is something in it. I've always thought that the way technology is going, and it is pushing to the point where people will be their own companies. And you think about it from an efficiency point of view, it will lead to more efficiency, but it's provided the individuals are able to clearly identify their strengths and basically be their own companies on their strength. Because if everyone does that, everyone finds a strength and builds around that.
Yeah, because if you try to be the jack of all trades on that, you start losing all of that efficiency. Yeah,
you can see how that efficiency could come about. Like Ricky was right. If someone's good at one thing and they're able to then take that good thing across multiple companies, everybody, the whole economy benefits. And the economic principle there is you have absolute advantage and comparative advantage. And when you've got people that are able to be, and the difference being comparative, absolute advantage, I'm good at something, you're good at something, I might be slightly better at something. There's an absolute advantage, but a comparative advantage is where you're looking at everyone's advantages and trying to place them so that you get the most out of them. And it's a strengths-based approach to an economy. So there is a lot to gain from that, but there's a cultural shift in terms of people working on their strengths.
Yeah. And limiting them to their strengths. And I think one of the paradigms that people will need to go through is you go, oh, but I'm very good at training speakers. That's my superpower, if you like, right? But there's a tendency for me, or for anyone, but I'll use my example, for me to go, well, I'm pretty good at facilitating or training the trainer stuff as well. And I'm worried that I won't have enough speakers to train to do what I'm absolutely good at. So I'll advertise that I do all this other stuff as well, just to make sure I fill my my funnel, to make sure I've got some money coming in, right? I think that's something that needs to be overcome. Ricky, on Aubrey's chat about housing, what insights did that bring up for you, or if you've got any questions for Aubrey?
Well, no, I completely agree with him that it is a challenge for our country, and it's not specific to New Zealand as well. I mean, it's a challenge everywhere. I think affordability is a challenge in most developed countries, for want of a better phrase. But I also acknowledge the fact that it is a coordinated effort in order to fix it. We can't be reliant on the council alone. We can't be reliant on our ministers down in Wellington, but we also have to rely on industry as well to to find a cheaper alternative in terms of reducing some of those construction costs. So supply of land, yes. Reduction of compliance costs, yes. But also there's opportunity for the likes of us as a community to change our paradigm about use. So you mentioned one of them earlier before. Airbnb is a way to change that mindset around utilizing that excess space that a lot of our houses have at the moment. So we have a different. We may have a different view on Airbnb. I've been a host in many different regards, but I think that there's plenty of opportunity in that space for Kiwis to help pay the bills, basically, in terms of owning their own property.
What I find interesting is that in these fairly disparate sort of talks we're having here, that community thing comes up every time. It's never down to one group or individual to fix one of these problems. It's got to have input from everybody around the whole sphere.
It takes a village to raise a child.
Sorry?
It takes a village to raise a child, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. And so it takes a village to change one too, apparently. Yeah. All right, so I've got some questions here. So I'm going to ask, I've got a couple from Adam. So the first one, what's to be said of personal security in a gig economy? If I'm constantly worried that I might not have a job next week and I'm constantly having to look for new work, that's a lot of stress. So, Ricky, do you want to say anything along those lines?
Yeah, I think at the moment it's a particularly, that question at the moment would be a particularly tricky question to answer irrespective of what you are, if you're an employee, employer, or a gig economy worker. The old
situation. The
C word. But in a normal environment, I think we talk about that specialization that Aubrey talked about earlier. It's the chance for you to shine. So if you're extremely good at plumbing, then you're probably going to get a lot of referrals and you're probably going to have a lot of work. And I experienced that having to get several plumbers that were recommended. I had to go for lesser options several times. So I think there's something to be said about your own quality of work. But I do acknowledge that you are at the peril of some externalities. But if you're good enough, there's always a pipe to fix as a plumber.
Yeah. Okay. Aubrey, do you have anything to add on that question?
Around security, yeah. Every consultant faces that. Where's the next gig coming from? I don't have any easy answer on it, but I know that when you are consulting, and this is from personal experience, when you're hyper focused, the work generally will come to you because you're putting a pole in the sand and saying, this is who I am. And as long as it's quite a clear post in the ground, people will find you. It's when you go chasing the work and then trying to change your spots to meet, whatever, that's when there's an issue. And I think that's where consultants get caught. And it seems like there's just never enough work. But yeah, being definite and very clear is a much better pathway.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a great point. It is, you're right. And a lot of that is around your purpose. So if you're very clear on your purpose, then people will come and find you. I think that's cool.
All right. So I'm going to sort of counter, but not really that. And Adam's also put here, it feels like the discussion is focusing more on gigs as a supplement to income versus gigs as a primary source. Do you have any thoughts on the differences for workers in that situation? But what I'm going to say is really supplementary to what you've both just said. What I would suggest, Adam, for you or anybody in that situation, because I've done this myself, is keep your current job if you've got one, and I know that might be the issue right now in our current lockdown situation, but keep your current job and try different things on the likes of Fiverr, Upwork, 99 Designs if you're a graphics person. There's a whole bunch of places to go to. But what you're doing is a wide range of things to find that one thing that you can put your pole in the ground. Because I can do a whole bunch of stuff. I'm reasonably talented at a whole bunch of stuff. There's a lot of stuff I can't do. There's a bunch of stuff that I can do. I'm pretty good with all aspects of communication and writing and script writing and various things like that. So I tried all those things to see, first of all, where I got with the expectations of the client. So some of them expected this, and I'm delivering this because I don't know it that well. That's obviously not my thing. That's not where I should be going. But if I hadn't tried that, I wouldn't know, or I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. So I tried, I think, about 5 different areas around that whole communication field before I settled on actually what I do best, and what really lights me up and gets me going is helping people put together talks and speeches that they can give about the business, to promote their business or whatever it is, their organisation, their non-profit, whatever. So I think if you can do it part-time, do it part-time first. Try a few things and narrow down on that one. But what you're looking for, as Aubrey said, is that one thing that you can stick your pole in the sand and go, this is who I am. This is what I do better than anyone else. And when you get to that point, a lot of that pressure is removed because people do come and find you. Cool.
That's a fair comment, Chris. I mean, basically what you're suggesting is that you don't put all your eggs in one basket until you know what the basket is.
Yeah. Build the basket. I mean, and the thing is that most of us never think about that. We don't know what we're good at. Most of us, we don't. We go, oh, you know, because I find a lot of the communication thing really easy, and it's not difficult. So I don't value it as much as somebody else that really has to struggle with that. And then there are other things that I'm not very mathematical. So people that find it easy, they go, oh, it's not even a skill. And I'm like, how do you do that? Like, how do you do spreadsheets? God. Anyway, we've got another question here. So from Pamela, what about protection of the individual in this? And I'm assuming this is still gig economy. Right now, unions and employment law offer elements of protection for the individual, particularly with regards to health and safety and fair remuneration.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we touched on a little bit earlier, I suppose, in terms of employee and independent contractor, which is what the challenge that Uber's going through at the moment. It goes both ways. If you are a gig worker, you have the ability to work at the moment for Lyft and Uber and your own service, and also do other things. So if you're an employee and your contract says you work 40 hours a week, then if they're in the absence of any flexible work time, there's an expectation that you fulfill those hours. So you have to work in your own life commitments around that. If you are a gig worker, then you can all of a sudden have a little bit more of a life, but the offset to that is that you don't get that same level of security. So it all depends on what stage you are in your life. And I think when you said before that, you know, putting all those eggs in one basket, it probably doesn't make much sense unless people are starting to come to you on the basis that you've put that and you've put that stamp in the ground and say, this is who I am. I think that's the time where you have the confidence in yourself not to be asking those sort of questions. And when you're in that position, that is.
Yeah, and I think, ultimately right now, I don't think there's a lot of protection. And I don't know how much legislative protection you can get in a micro gig economy type thing. I think the Consumer Guarantees Act still apply. If you say, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and you can't do X, Y, Z, that people can get their money back. And so I think there is that basic protection for the consumer. But for you as the person doing the work, you just got to make sure you're doing the work. And it is a mindset shift. I did find it quite difficult when I was not earning an income. So I was unemployed. I'd gone from one job. I'd left that, and I was going to try this thing for a period of time. And it is, you can't underestimate how much of a change that is. I mean, particularly if you're old like me, you've done things in other ways your whole life. But yeah, there is a change. And so I don't have a stronger answer to that. Aubrey, you got anything to add to that?
There's gives and takes with the gig economy versus being in a nice, secure job under an employer. I think the part of the answer is in the gig economy, you are able to demand more because you don't carry those same securities that you would as if you were in a nice stable company with all those sorts of privileges. However, I would say that as the gig economy starts getting bigger and bigger, I think you'll find that security in any company is less and less because companies have been so much more agile nowadays than they've ever had to be. So
yeah, and company security right now with the COVID issue is a non-starter anyway. So yeah, in a way, Pamela, we don't have a choice because security is an illusion. Oh God, that's depressing. Sorry. Okay, so Adam has asked another question for Aubrey, and he asked the question, then he's clarified it. So I'll read both. So it's a big question, but I was wondering how much you think the lag in housing affects security and quality. And to be clear, I'm referring to both the longevity of the housing, so the actual house itself, I assume, as well as the length of time it takes to construct new. So, sorry, the cat's sneezing. I hope it's not catching. If cats can transfer coronavirus, it's all over. It's all over. I'm just calling it. Okay, so sorry. So how much do you think the lag of housing affects security and quality, and the longevity of the housing as well as the length of time it takes to construct new?
Yeah. So there's a convention or an assumption that the length of the build is directly correlated to housing quality. It's not absolutely true. It's an assumption. So there are methods of building houses where, it could be done in a factory, pulled out the site and popped up, and the quality is just as good as any you'll get. So there's probably not necessarily that link. It's just in New Zealand, we're so used to building on a certain time frame. So I'm not sure if I've answered that question properly. How much the lag in housing affects security and quality? So the lag in terms of catching up with the housing supply, or
I'm not I'm not too sure either. If you want to, Adam, if you want to type in there and let us know, clarify that further. But I think I think you're making a good point there. I think the economies of scale makes a big difference. So if you're a major developer, and by a major developer, I'm meaning you're creating housing. I don't want to say blocks because I don't want to think of an apartment block, but I'm thinking of like a village. You create a village. You've got a group of houses, a group of houses, a group of houses. Maybe you create a little place for shopping or whatever. If you're doing a big development like that, and you're controlling all the materials for that, and you're doing this with not I'm going to build it and flip it, but I'm going to build it for the long term for a housing tenancy for the next 15 to 20 years, then there are a whole bunch of economies of scale in terms of the materials. There's a whole bunch of economies of scale in terms of the labor and how that's done. And if you're looking at that on a longer term plan, which I don't think we do here enough, then it does change that whole thing.
Yeah, it's just had a clarification there. So yeah, it's a quality issue that he's talking about. So yeah, so in terms of quality, there was a whole bunch of crap put up in the 80s. Like,
I think I'm living in one.
Let's just put that out there. The floors were made of basically Weet-Bix. You get water on them and they're gone. So there's definitely a quality issue with houses built within certain periods. In terms of the Building Act and the building code the way it is today, there's less of that. But also that quality issue is part of the reason why you get less innovation, because the experience of all of those crap houses built in the 80s plus the leaky homes issue, has led to a legislative framework that's quite tight around materials. Materials have to be of a certain standard. They have to be passed by brands testing and all sorts in order to make it through. So I think quality is less of an issue where people are following the rules.
So that restriction or legislative restriction. Basically, what you're saying is that's strangling some innovation while increasing cost, because they have to, if they do come up with a new way of doing anything, then they have to spend a lot of money testing it and so forth. Is that right?
Yeah, it slows down the length of time it takes for new products to get to market, because they've got to meet the stringent bar, and that's good. Don't get me wrong, that's great. And I think the issue that Adam's pointing to is that you have all these houses that didn't meet that bar and they make it onto the market. So I think that comes about in situations where rogue products make it through. Innovations haven't been fully tested. It also happens when there's a rush on to build. People just build, and having less regard for the quality of what they're building.
Yeah, and Adam's added the legacy issue that historic buildings create. So honestly, the place, because I'm renting, I've never owned property, and I don't actually think I ever will, to be honest with you. But the place I'm renting, I've been here a long term, so I guess a long-term tenant, 8 years, 9 years now. It's pretty much falling apart now. It's pretty bad. So I wouldn't imagine these guys will be able to sell it, and I actually think they'd have trouble renting it if I actually moved out. So how does that legacy of those old buildings factor in? Is there anything that legislatively that says if your building drops below a certain standard, you can't rent it? You're pretty much either going to have to live in it or knock it down and build something decent.
There are rules around it. It's more to do with the healthy homes. So the insulation, heating. It has to be at a certain standard that it's livable. And I'm just reading the question now. So the legacy issue of houses that aren't built properly, that just adds to you've got a housing stock of, say, 1 million houses, and then you've got 10% of them that are legacy issues. You may as well take that out of the equation. Now you've got 900,000 houses. That's the effect. So you also have to account for the houses that aren't good enough, that need to be fixed up. So back to the start of the corridor, it's affordability, quality, and availability. So it's all three of those issues put together. In terms of that micro-housing question, micro-housing is one solution.
Can you define micro-housing?
We're talking about those small units that you can, park up as an ancillary building on an existing section, or it might be anything under a certain square meterage, which it's not considered a full dwelling. It's a small building.
So if you dump a fitted out container in your backyard type thing.
Yeah, those types of buildings. So under 10 square meters, a consent isn't required as long as it doesn't have services. And then once it goes over 10 square meters, or if it has, plumbing and all those sorts of things, it's considered like a micro house. Micro housing has the ability to solve housing short term. And in fact, micro housing was the solution to the first set of housing shortage that we had in this country. And those houses were built in Frankton. And there's a photo, I don't have it, but you see all these little micro units.
The railway homes. Homes.
Those little railway homes.
So they mass prefab them there, and then they were sent out everywhere and put up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, workers' quarters. And that was the original solution. But what's important is, go back to the principle, is it important to be housed or to own your own house? And as long as people have got a roof over head, they're then able to be productive in society.
And there's other things to think about in terms of that, because the challenge is there's a lot of properties that have the ability to be subdivided, but people find that it might be an alternative to just put an ancillary on the back, so a 60 square meter ancillary. So I don't know. I mean, my own question I have for all of us is, when we come out the other side of the C word, where do people think things are going to head in terms of the market? I mean, currently we have our mate down in Wellington who has reduced the OCR to 0.25%. The capital restrictions on banks have been lifted for the time being. Well, they haven't been lifted, but they haven't had the same restrictions that they were tightening up on. There's a lot of government spending going on at the moment. There's a lot of injection via the stimulus package. Do people feel that the housing market is going to come back? Is it going to plateau? Is it going to go up? I'm interested to see what both your views are on this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think personally, the bigger issue for most people is the employment side of things. So the fact that I'm worried about where my income's going to go means I'm out of the market for buying a house if I was in one. If I was in a house already and I was thinking about selling, I'm just not going to sell now because I don't know what's going to happen. And if I did want to sell, I think there's less people to want to buy. So I'm going to have trouble selling it. You know what I mean? So I think it's going to be a depressed housing market for a period. And I think that's a lot of that's around the that tentative situation around employment and income. So that's going to be a big issue. Government spending more is probably the only thing that makes sense that will work, will help get that expectation of income back up, in my opinion. I'm not an economist. The reducing the OCR and the cash rate, that sort of thing, that might be really helpful for business that are having trouble meeting payroll and that sort of thing, and we'd hope that will help. But I don't think that'll help the housing market and a lot of consumer spending. I don't think it's really going to help that. It's really going to help, if it helps anyone, it's going to help business. So that's my opinions. What do you reckon, Aubrey?
Yeah, and this is one of the odd things about the New Zealand economy is that people, instead of investing in businesses, they'll go and buy a house. That's their major investment. What the virus situation has done or will do is it will probably take people's focus away from housing, as the importance of housing.
Ownership.
It will take people's focus towards other things, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we shouldn't be growing our economy based on the house prices. We should be building our economy based on production of value, and it's a better place for our focus to be.
That was a very, very big point you made when we had an earlier discussion. I forgot to jump on that today, but you said that in Germany, more people would have, they have so you work, you save, you have a big lump of cash. In New Zealand, we throw that cash into a house that sits there and does nothing. In places, I think you said Germany, they're more likely to get that cash and create a business or create some sort of investment feature, vehicle that actually produces, or at least produces income while they're paying rent, because that's a better use of capital resources. And doing that across the board, spread over a population, is better for the economy as a whole. And I thought that was very interesting, and that's a paradigm shift that you gave me a few weeks ago, which is one of the reasons you're here today. Okay, guys, we're going to call this because we've got well over time. For those of you at home, thank you so much for viewing, jumping in and helping us out watching this, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching the replay, because the replay will be up there from now on. And if you do like it, because normally at this point I'd ask for a round of applause, but I mean, we've got three applauses. That's not going to do it. So jump on YouTube, give us a like if you in lieu of applause at this point. That would be great. Join the community. You can go to TEDxRuakura.com, find out what's happening, and go through there. You can link into Facebook, join follow the page. like the page. You'll find out what's going on. You'll be invited, I should say, to future TEDxRuakura salons and that sort of thing. But I would like to thank Aubrey and Ricky for the conversation today. A great korero. And I look forward to seeing you all at some point in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Ricky.
Thanks, Chris. Ka kite brother.
Okay, see you guys.
See ya.